All right, thank you. Welcome back. Welcome back. So for a long time, Nixxes was somewhat of an enigma in the Dutch games industry. It was founded by former demo scene programmer Jurgen Katzman in 1999 to port Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver to Dreamcast. All right, so now I want you to sit back and think of all the cool things that I just said in that one sentence. It was demo scene developer. You remember the demo scene? That was cool, right? 1999, song by Prince. That was cool. And just to think, the first project of your newly formed company is doing a port of Soul Reaver to freaking Dreamcast. How cool is that? But it didn't stop there. Nixxes went on to doing other insanely cool stuff, and they quickly became the co-development partner of studios like IO Interactive and Crystal Dynamics and Guerrilla Games. And 2 years ago, they became part of the PlayStation family. And now they start porting PlayStation games to PC. But how do they do that? And here to talk about how you port PlayStation games to PC the Nixxes way is, I have to see if I say this right, you're the systems senior system programmer, right?
Yeah.
Alexandra Cunetchi.
So welcome everyone. It is a pleasure to have you all here at this session, where I'd like to introduce you to the art of porting video games. But let's start first with some quick introductions. My name is Alexandra Cunetchi. I have been with Nixxes for 5 years, primarily working on porting projects. Over these years, I've had the privilege on working projects that involve some of my all-time personally favorite video game titles. And I've been happy to contribute to the process of bringing these to new platforms so that more people can enjoy them. And for those of you that might not know, Nixxes is a game studio located in Utrecht, and it's home to a dedicated team of passionate individuals who excel at various facets of game development. And while the studio's name is primarily linked to porting, as you've heard prior, these days there has been a notable shift. We also have a very large content team, which has significantly expanded the studio, and this expansion has allowed us to channel our in-house talent and creativity towards assisting other studios in realizing their visions and delivering exceptional gaming experiences. But it has also allowed us to enhance the quality of our porting projects. So when it comes to porting, the Nixxes repertoire is actually quite extensive. This is a wide range of projects that include ventures into the realm of VR, cloud gaming, optimizing games to older console generations, as well as adapting to newer ones. However, today's focus is a deep dive into our PC porting projects. So the PC porting project sounds simple enough, but let's break it down. What is that? In our context, it means ensuring that the game is accessible and enjoyable by most PC gamers. And to dive into specific, it means that the players should have a straightforward way of getting their hands on the game. And this often involves making the game accessible for popular platforms such as Steam or Epic Games Store. We also aim to make the game compatible with most standard PC setups. In most cases, this translates to ensuring that the game runs smoothly on Windows, is visible on screen, and is playable with a mouse and keyboard. Many of you probably know that the PCs are easily configurable when it comes to hardware. You can have various screens with various graphics cards, peripherals of whatnot. And I personally think that gives the PC users significant power. And as a wise spider once said, with great power, there must also come great responsibility. A responsibility that users can only successfully fulfill when provided with the right tools, which is why we do our best to provide users with a way to customize their gaming experience to suit their best needs. And just a little secret, PC gamers love tweaking their settings to push the limits of their hardware. So now that we know exactly what we're trying to achieve, where do we start? Our journey begins by engaging with the original developers of the projects that we're working on. They are the pioneers of what made the project successful to begin with, but they are also an invaluable wealth of knowledge because they know the ins and outs of the game and its engine, what exists, what's lacking, what needs altering. And to get the project rolling, we also embark on a quest to gather the right tools, which involves identifying the necessary hardware, software, licenses. And sometimes it's a very straightforward process, like ordering a few new solid-state drives, because it seems that as time goes, AAA projects do as well, but then in size. I started my job, I think, with 1 terabyte drive, and then I went to 2, 4, I think I'm now nearing 6. But other times it can also be a real challenge, requiring us tracking down very specific versions of software that are impossible to get even through official channels. We had a project where we needed a very specific version of Flash just as it was being phased out, and we just couldn't get it. And we had to proceed using a different version and hope that things are still going to be working as expected, and yeah, there won't be any major surprises down the line. An essential step also is about setting up accounts and ensuring streamlined access to the project. It usually includes being added to various chat channels, mailing lists, as well as getting access to the version control repositories where the project is. Documentation, which can sometimes be outdated or sometimes too new if the core team is already working on a newer project, but it's still better than nothing. And once we have the project in our hands, we try to embark on a comprehensive assessment of its components. We start with an engine assessment, and do note we usually don't work with commercial engines, so it's never as easy as choosing a different platform and just clicking build. Occasionally we actually face engines that are so meticulously tailored to the PlayStation specifications that when it comes to porting, they actually are a very significant challenge. However, on more fortunate occasions, such as on the most recently released titles, such as the Insomniac titles, we stumble upon game engines with pathways or tools that the original developers use to facilitate PC development, and this allows us to leverage or expedite our porting process. So this assessment is usually done while trying to compile or run the project for our target platform. And this typically falls on one person, as throwing more people at it will just mean that they will be collectively hitting the same wall together, the same compiler or linker error. And as we progress, we try to address the easier issues immediately, we document the more complex ones, and we leave them later with a helpful to-do label. The duration of this phase can vary significantly, ranging from minutes to moments to hours, weeks. But we try to stay under 3 weeks usually, and just leaving a lot of to-dos for later. And at this point, we have a solid grasp of the more fundamental engine system work that needs alteration. This might include overhauling the file system, reworking the networking or audio code. However, a comprehensive rendering assessment is also essential before proceeding. And to tackle this, we have one of our many in-house talented rendering engineers assess the project and evaluate what are the options there. And at this stage, we should have a good understanding of what needs to happen to get the game running on the PC. And you might think that we're ready to integrate the entire team and charge forward. We know exactly what needs to be done, but not so fast. So far, we have only figured out what requires to get the game running on PC, but that doesn't mean it's playable. You can also run the game on a calculator, but would that be a good experience? Probably not. So at Nixxes, we try to break down the game assessment into 3 detailed plans, and they ensure our next steps into the journey of production, and these are the scalability, input, and UI plan, which I'll be going in depth in a bit. So when it comes to rendering, we dive into one of the most critical paths of our porting project, and this involves extensive testing on a variety of hardware setups, because as I said, PC configurations can be very diverse. Our focus also heavily gravitates towards investigating optimizations that are essential for delivering a smooth gaming experience. Users will hunt you down if their game doesn't run very well. Some optimizations can be discreetly applied in the background, benefiting all players. However, others have the potential of altering the game's visual, and for these we offer user-facing options. So some of these options tend to look the same in most PC games, but some are more tailored to the title. For example, this is the graphics settings for Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, and you might find that in this title you can change the crowd density, which makes a lot of sense because you're playing in the beautiful city of New York where crowds are very common. But if you were to put this in Ratchet and Clank when you're on different planets and the population is more scarce, crowd density is not something that would make a lot of sense. So to stay on track and set achievable goals for our team, we also create a list of system requirements for our target platforms, the result of which looks something like this. This is the officially published recommended spec for Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales. And it doesn't look like this from the get-go, but this acts as a benchmark for our ongoing work during production. And this approach, including the optimization and system requirements, is a key part of our scalability plan, which guarantees that our games run smoothly on various hardware setups. For a deeper dive on how these things were achieved in Marvel's Spider-Man Remaster, I highly recommend checking out the GDC talk delivered by my colleagues, where they will tell you more about triangles, stutter struggles, big whoopsies, and what kind of things they do just because it's cool. So while we have a dedicated team of people working on the rendering side and optimizations, at the same time we have team members looking at a very important aspect of the game, such as input. How does the user interact with the game using mouse and keyboard, and what makes the most sense there? We start by looking at how the input works in the current engine, and even though some engines have a very good implementation, we often tend to reroute it through our own framework. The input system that we usually provide is part of a larger subset of tools that we carry over from project to project. Think of it as the Nixxes backpack that contains all sorts of helpful interfaces, but it's not just for input, also rendering and store implementations. But back to input, our next steps in getting the mouse and keyboard support is what we call the one-on-one mapping, which means that every gamepad key gets assigned, or stick movement gets assigned a mouse and keyboard equivalent. And the one-on-one mapping is often inspired by the default gameplay stance, which means that the left arm is around the WSD keys and the right one is on the mouse. So it kind of looks something like this. If you notice that the D-pad keys, which are commonly used for changing weapons, get assigned to keys from 1 to 4, the map or inventory, which is commonly accessed through the touchpad, gets assigned to tab. Options key that is used to bring out the pause menu gets assigned to escape. The X key, the cross key, which is used for jumping, translates very naturally to spacebar. And it's a great building block for future improvements. We then start looking at what this implementation might be lacking. For example, when porting Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, that's an original PlayStation 5 title, we had to consider the functionality of the adaptive triggers. For those that are not familiar, it's a feature of the DualSense controller that offers resistance and enhanced haptic feedback for the triggers. Let's look at an example. Here you can see me using the Negatron Collider that charges as if I'm half pressing the right trigger of the DualSense controller and only shoots once I fully press it. A half press is not something you can simulate with mouse and keyboard. So we had to really ensure that users would be able to complete with mouse and keyboard all those actions. So we had to check all those code as well. Another thing that you can do with a controller, but you probably cannot do with mouse and keyboard, is swiping on the touchpad. Swiping your keyboard's not really going to do anything, so we also have to figure those parts out. A classic issue of porting from gamepad to mouse and keyboard is, for particularly third-player adventure games, is the translation of the left stick to WSD. You see, with the left stick, you can use it. You have a very wide range of motion of movement. You can just move it a little bit for a slow walk, a little bit further for a light jog, and you can go all the way for a full run. When it comes to the keyboard, I'm afraid there's just two states. You're either going that direction or you're not. There is just no in between. And that means that you will usually be running into the direction of the press WAD keys. But then how do you allow the users to explore every nook and cranny without sprinting left and right and breaking the immersion while they're trying to explore the game? We usually provide an alternative by using a modifier key, such as Shift or Control, which would allow users for slow walking, so it becomes a bit more immersive. Now, after the one-on-one mapping is implemented, we usually try to evaluate what needs improvement. And there could be combinations of keys that are just like excruciating to perform. So maybe it makes more sense to just have it as one key instead of keys of 2 or 3, as it would be on a gamepad. After all, there's so many more keys on a keyboard. But do mind that it's best to not use the lesser common keys, because users might have compact keyboards. Don't assume there's a number pad, for example. And just because gaming mouses have more than 3 buttons, don't expect that your entire user base has one. So expect only a standard mouse. And perhaps something also to consider when working on input is key ghosting and jamming. For those that are gamers, might be very familiar with this, but the severity and occurrences depends on brands. But for that, we generally try to stay at a maximum of 3 button presses. I'm not going to mention how at some point I ended up in the office with a very officey keyboard and I couldn't understand why I was not very good at playing one of our titles. So yeah, a little recommendation on my part: don't be too frugal when it comes to keyboard. Do your research, treat yourself. It's really worth it, so that you can press more keys if necessary. When it comes to input, when it comes to the input aspect of porting, we also love when the game uses an action-based system instead of directly referencing physical keys. And I'll explain that in a bit. So let's say hypothetically we have a piece of code. Say this piece of gameplay code is triggered by the square key. And during the one-on-one mapping, we thought it's great to be triggered by one of the mouse keys. But there's probably more places in code where the square key state is relevant. But then the context is different for each. It could be a trigger for an attack. It could be part of a combo. It could mean totally something else when it's used in the UI. And in all those cases, when it comes to mouse and keyboard, it might be best done by a different key. For example, we might want to have the Hall combo assigned to the E key, because as I said earlier, one key is better than a combination than 2 or 3 on a keyboard. You might also want in UI to have it mapped to the Enter key, for example. And this might look very straightforward for now, but when you try to iterate and change it and backtracking to the context and trying to change things and figure it out, it's very error-prone. It's not very nice to work with. So what we really love and find awesome is if the code instead references an abstraction layer of actions that communicate about the usage for the input, which in its turn is referencing to a state of a physical key, because this allows us to easily expand it to more physical devices. So back to input. Also maybe an obvious, but still something I'd like to mention is keep in mind the user environment. Any system function keys, such as combinations of Alt F4, but also keep in mind any common overlay usages, such as taking a screenshot on the Steam overlay using F12. It might be a very infuriating experience if you're just trying to perform a basic attack, or if you're in the middle of a boss fight and you have like the Steam, Epic, NVIDIA game bar overlay popping in and you can't figure out what's happening. Or you end up in your browser window and you're no longer in the game. But this process of getting a good default mouse and keyboard is an ongoing effort throughout the project, and it takes a lot of iterations to get right. And while mouse and keyboard is the foundation of using a PC, these days it seems that many of PC gamers that particularly play third-player adventure games love doing so with a gamepad. And even though we would love everyone to be using the same gamepad to make our lives easier, we can imagine that some controllers fit some users better. So we try to accommodate. This is a picture taken by myself during my first year on the job. Might be silly to some, but I was very excited to have them all as part of my permanent setup for a while. There are a few new generations of controllers missing there, but what I would like you to notice is that each of them is different, and each of them has different buttons, different in color, different in size, different in shapes. So in case of a native PlayStation title, you should only assume that the game can only show DualShock or DualSense icons. No other device is supported, and the art for it is also non-existent. So once we make a list of devices that we will be supporting, we need to provide the art for it, but we also need to put in some effort to end up with something like this. And mind you, this is live. I didn't have to restart the game. I can just change to any device I want at any given moment and then just keep playing, because the game will show me exactly what needs to be done and how. But in order to be able to show the correct input to the user, we often need to build a few systems up for ourselves. One of the systems that we usually need is something that has the ability to update statically placed prompts. And it's fairly simple if you think about it. Just needs to subscribe to the input system and know which device is in use. The device is usually changed based on the button you press, or if you move something a little bit like the mouse or the stick. Another nice system that we built is the one that can update the input text. It tends to point back to the logic of the first mentioned system, but it also updates the entire text. Because the reason for that is that certain terminology that applies for gamepad does not quite apply for mouse and keyboard. Think of pushing your left stick forward, or tilting, or half pressing. That's not something you can really do on a keyboard. So we need to make sure that the text is updated with the correct terminology. And last but not least, we need a proper way to represent the mouse and keyboard keys. It's rather important to make sure that they stand out in the interface, otherwise they go unnoticed. And for that, we build a way to contextualize them using a special denoting color, as well as stylized background to give it that extra input feeling. And the system has to ensure that also the background is uniformly scalable. Think of 9 slicing for those that are familiar with the term. And it's to accommodate both for short key names, but also long key names, as well as any preferred user language. I'm not sure why that didn't render. But we also try to make use of icons where possible, because the icons can be read faster by the players, and particularly in time-constrained situations. Yeah, so that's all nice. And so far, if you think about it, we have covered scalability, we have covered input. So we are now to our third plan, which is the UI. It outlines usually, particularly the interaction that the user should expect when using the in-game menus with the mouse and keyboard. So we try to make sure that every interaction is consistent, it's practical, and feels natural for a PC user. So what does that mean? Our guidelines are that we should have 100% mouse and mouse support. That means that any item on screen that state can be changed with the gamepad should also be done through the mouse cursor. There is a slight difference, though. The mouse cursor also requires a slight hover animation that the gamepad does not have usually. We also try to have 100% keyboard support, which means that it's particularly done for the power users. That means that everything in the menu can be done just with the keyboard alone, but it also needs to seamlessly work with the mouse. And we try to make sure that we don't break the gamepad support, so we maintain the 100% gamepad support. So our goal is to make the game feel like a PC game. This means that scrolling should work exactly as you would expect anywhere in any other software on your PC. Think of your browser or file explorer. You should be able to click and drag the scroll bar, click on the arrows to go one step up or one step down. If you have the cursor over the list and you scroll with the wheel, it should also scroll. So that all has to be implemented from ground up. Same goes for changing tabs. You see, with the controller, you can only change tabs from left to right, but with the mouse user, you want to be able to click on any tab at any given moment and make sure that it updates. I'm not sure what's happening there. Using sliders should also feel like any other PC slider. Think of changing volumes. You should be able to click and drag it. You should be able to just pick a value as you click on any parts of the slider. Any decisive actions are expected to occur just like on PC using the left mouse button click, but also enter. And here's where we start slightly deviating from regular PC software, is because game players don't like their default gameplay stance interrupted. They prefer having spacebar also as an alternative for enter or clicking with the left mouse button. And another thing that might be common for most PC software is interactions such as double clicks and middle clicks and right mouse clicks. They don't tend to work very well in the environment of games, particularly with first-time players. They make things very confusing and unnatural, which is why when we have to do certain like hold actions, which are not very common for most PC software unless you're dragging and dropping things around, but in games, if you think about it, every time you want to upgrade a skill or you want to purchase a weapon or something, there is this sort of hold interaction that you would have with the gamepad, where the alternative for it, such as double-clicking, right mouse clicks, middle clicks, having a pop-up confirmation dialog is really frustrating to the users, so they prefer maintaining the hold action as a hold action when it comes to mouse and keyboard as well. And you might notice often that when you play a game with the gamepad, you will be prompted somewhere on the screen to use the cross button to proceed into your interaction. When it comes to mouse and keyboard, if you try to show them the left mouse button, users might get very confused because it's so natural to just be able to click with the left mouse button that when you show it to them, they think like, oh, maybe I need to click my right mouse button. Or if you tell them like you have to press the enter key, then they no longer think that they can click anywhere and they have to actually go to the enter key. So we try to stay away from showing any things that are extremely natural for this user base. So let's see what all of this means in practice. Oh, sorry. There we go. So this is the pause menu from Marvel Spider-Man. It's one of the simpler menus when you ask yourself how should it work with mouse and keyboard. You can just use the D-pad to navigate the menu, and you can probably use WASD in the similar way. You can press enter or spacebar in the way you would press the cross to just follow through into the menu. Circle to back out, which naturally translates to escape. With the mouse, you just want to be able to go any item on the list. You want to be able to click through it. You want to be able to click the circle button. That would now be an escape button, but it also has to have a hover animation so that you can back out. This is easy. Now on to the next challenge. This one is great. You see, the navigation with the gamepad is very deterministic, as in you use the bumpers to navigate the tabs, You use the left stick to scroll the biography, and you can use the D-pad to select a new character. But the navigation with the D-pad is very deterministic. So you select a character, you go to the bio, you close the bio, you go back to the character selection. Were you to do that with the mouse users, they would be very frustrated because it would be very slow, and because things are already on screen, they expect that they can just interact with anything at any given moment. So we had to make slight adjustments. We had to make the differentiation between the currently selected character on screen, the possible new character selection. We had to make sure that users could scroll the character grid list, but also the biography at the same time, but also pick any of the other tabs that they wanted at any given moment to facilitate their expectations. Another fun example is the matching lengths minigame from Marvel Spider-Man. It's a very nice game to play with the gamepad because you have like the very satisfying precision, but it doesn't translate very well when you're trying to play with mouse and keyboard. So with that, we had to go for something that was more familiar to them. So we went for sliders. It might be a bit less exciting than the gamepad version, but it communicates very, very well and clear what needs to be done and how it can be achieved. And I guess at this point we enter more of the world of gameplay, but the mini-games in Marvel Spider-Man are actually more in the world of UI. So this is the circuit mini-game. It works very straightforward with the gamepad. You select an empty cell on the board, and then you can select an item from the inventory, and then that will be placed on the board. When translating this directly into mouse and keyboard, users found it very slow because you had to click one and the other, and then it was just no fun, and they didn't want to do it anymore. And a lot of them had the expectations that they could just drag and drop things around, that they could take any piece and put it anywhere on the board, take it off the board, put it back into the inventory. So we had to think of ways of how we can facilitate that. After a lot of internal debate and discussion, also with our internal design team, this is what we ended up doing. We brought both inventories forward to the users, allowing that very satisfying drag and drop functionality, making sure that we keep the complexity of the game by highlighting the cells that the items can go into, as well as the inventory items that when you are hovering over the cell, which ones can go where. And if you think about it, this is almost feels what it would have been like were this to be a physical game, where you can just put things there. So now that we have covered input, UI rendering, and optimizations, we ask ourselves if we are missing anything. And even though we try to provide a good default for input, and not every setup is the same, and not everyone finds the same combinations comfortable. To ensure that users can keep playing comfortably, we provide mouse settings for tweaking inversions and sensitivities. We also provide a key mapping menu that allows users to change the most common game actions. And adding settings is, well, pretty easy, but then we ask ourselves if all the other settings still make sense. And that's when we tend to reshuffle all the settings, because we were trying to get the gamepad settings not spread out through all the entire other lists, but have a list of their own. And we also don't want any random graphics settings spread out through all the lists, because we are bringing our own. And you might find often that with Nixxes titles, there is a split between display and graphics settings. So the graphics settings are more about performance, and they are the ones that might alter the visuals of your game. And we try to make sure that the feedback loop for changing them is very quick, so that the game picks up live, and you can see like, oh, if I change the texture, then you can see like, are you comfortable with these visuals, so that you can proceed playing with them. The display settings are usually the settings that are directly related to your screen. And they might make the game not render for a few frames, which is why they are applied in bulk using an apply button. And on very rare occasions, there are certain combinations of settings that might not work exactly as expected. So they might mess up your title so bad that sometimes it's impossible to launch successfully again. And for those rare occasions, we actually have our awesome launcher. It's our safe fallback because it's very disconnected from the game, but it helps you reset your settings, and it helps you keep playing in case things didn't go smoothly. Another aspect of wrapping things up is also to ensure that we provide the players with the same experience as they would have on the console. So we need to make sure that users have a way to choose a different language. We also make sure that the game starts in the user preferred language. We also try to make sure that the users can manually load and save the game. You see on the PlayStation, this is done very gracefully through the operating system. So as a developer, you don't really need to think about it too much. But on PC, we actually have to build those systems from ground up, as well as the menus for them. Also, we need to ensure that the cloud saves are set up, which is done through the publishing stores. And also quite important for the players is the achievements. So we need to ensure that all the trophies, as known on PlayStation, are set up as achievements with the publishing stores. And we also need to make sure that the game is setting out the data so the users have that very beautiful overview that they love. Well, at this point, we should be ready. It's time to let the cat out of the bag. We've figured out everything. Well, not really. It wouldn't be port of Nixxes if we didn't ask ourselves a final question, and that is, can we do better? Of course we can. One of those things is adding Steam Deck Verified. It's quite straightforward when you look at the verifications. It just needs to be playable with the controller check. Should show controller icons. Also done. I guess a bit of a tricky part is that you shouldn't fall under a 9-pixel threshold for a font character at the height of 1280 by 800, which might be okay for a console game, but on PC we're actually very comfortable at making things tiny, but you shouldn't do that in case you want to be on Steam Deck Verified. And we actually also really care about the performance on Steam Deck because we want it to be a nice experience. We could also add Steam input for our title, which allows users to easily remap gamepad functionality. It's a very nice feature, particularly for the titles that don't support that natively. We could also add ultra-wide. But if you look closer at this background, which is cut off, you might guess that adding ultra-wide is not that easy. To fix broken animations, remove or place objects, to make the game look correct, we often need help from our content team, as well as a lot of UI work to fix a lot of broken backgrounds that were never expected to go in any other aspect ratios. And there were so many of those. And don't forget the mini-games, also part of UI. And even when we would think that we tackled everything and we got everything fixed, there would be some sneaky assets somewhere that we've missed on some frame somewhere that, thanks to our vigilant QA, we got it fixed. So when we do ultra-wide, we don't just make things work on ultra-wide. We also support multi-monitor setup, which looks something like this, at least in the development environment. But it brings a new set of issues of its own. Because things are calculated or clamped to the center monitor, for example, as you can see when the input is randomly displaced on screen far away from its context, or how the icons are randomly floating on the map, or how the stickers in photo mode are stuck on the first screen and they can't be moved to the desired location anymore. And while ultra-wide is fun to work on, let's see what other things we can do better. We can improve loading times. With Insomniac titles, the PC file system was not exactly as optimal as it could be, so there was actually someone on the team that worked very hard to make it better and make faster loading times, particularly for players with solid-state drives. It's also one of the few titles that has direct storage, which should make things even faster. Ray tracing is one of our players' all-time favorites. Marvel Spider-Man already had a very good implementation for ray tracing, but since it's a very popular feature amongst our players, our team tried their best to push it even further. Notice the details that would normally not be there in the reflections on the console on the left are much clearer, more sharper, and have more details on the right. And you might ask yourself why we do all this, put the effort in the large, but also in the small details when it comes to porting. And it's for the players, for the people out there that really enjoy the features that we worked on. And that also makes it worth it. And what you've heard today sounds like the kind of challenge that you often think about or enjoy solving. Keep an eye on our website in case there's an opening for you. We're always looking for people. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Alexandra. We have time for questions. So, who has a question? Please, guys, don't let me stand here with this thing.
Yeah. Thanks. Question about the source code and porting of those lovely games you mentioned. How much time would it take to port, to familiarize yourself with the source code of the game for a typical AAA game?
I would say anything from a week to 3 weeks. But mostly because you actually have quite some help, right, from people that have developed the code and they're working on it. But it is expected that you should be able to read any code at any given time. So that's one of the things that we're actually looking into people. But also there's the documentation that helps out with the reading the code. And it's also because we have the team that is so diverse, everyone is specialized in one part of the code. So there's nobody that always knows the entire code base, right? So everyone's like, oh yeah, I know this part of the rendering. Oh yeah, I know this part of the input, or I know this part. So we're all kind of come together, which is why during the daily, it also helps saying somebody like, hey, I have an issue with this part. And then somebody be like, oh yeah, I had something, I know something about that part. So yeah, it depends on how much do you actually need to know as well.
Thank you. Another quick question. How often do you run into issues with modern video drivers these days? Is that still on a weekly basis? And do you have to work around it? Or how would you approach that?
I think our team is in close contact with the driver makers. And once there's issues with the titles, that they do contact them. But usually by the time the game is about to be released, there's already some sort of good support when it comes to that. I would also recommend finding one of my colleagues here who specializes in rendering, and she can answer all your questions about it.
We'll try that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
We have another question here. You can throw it.
Thanks. Hello, Alexandra. Thank you very much for your presentation. Quite insightful, and congratulations on the Best Technology Award.
Did we win?
Nomination, right? So now sorry, I got you there almost. No, but now I understand. It's very impressive the work you guys do. My question, regarding your multiplayer titles, right? Do you run into any problems regarding porting a console and that infrastructure regarding the online environment to let's say a cloud environment or servers for the PC. Sorry, yeah, PC. How does that work?
The cloud environment for PC? What do you like, the multiplayer games?
Yeah. So your multiplayer games.
Yeah.
Normally, all the games they are like on Sony, right?
Yeah.
You port them to PlayStation, to PCs.
Yeah.
Does that affect also the background regarding the online infrastructure?
Yes. It also depends what you're aiming for, right? Like, do you want cross-platform multiplayer? Do you want them to matchmake, or just like in the Steam itself, or also with the Epic players, or also with the PlayStation players? So that does change a little bit of the infrastructure, and you do have to write a lot of the networking code specific for a PC that is entirely missing, and it's different from the one from the console part. And it's not entirely new. Nixxes has done that before, so it's totally possible. But yeah, it requires a bit of planning and working around with.
Do you have some sort of integration to connect all different environments to make a cross-platform? Do you know how that works?
Not per se. It really depends per project. We did that for Avengers. In Avengers, you could do cross-platform, I think. But it really depends on the project and the framework, the networking framework that they are already using. But Nixxes doesn't have anything in-house, if that's what you're asking.
No, I understand. But I thought maybe you make that whole technology to make it cross-platform.
If it's necessary, then we do. If it's not, then we don't.
Fair enough. No, thank you. Cool.
Okay.
Stuff.
Anyone else? Yes, all the way up there.
I like a challenge.
Oh, this is such a great sport.
But thank you. As a game design student who's looking for an internship or potentially job position later in the year, I'm more so specifically wondering, with Nixxes being mostly a porting studio, but the content team growing itself, is that still mainly focused on more programming heavy projects, or are there actual new IPs potentially that are worked on?
I don't know exactly much about the content team, but our lead designer and game director are here. You can find them and ask them all the questions you want. Yeah?
Can I throw the microphone for a quick answer?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, wait. Yeah, can you catch it? Yeah, all right.
Take it? Try to take it? Can you repeat the question? Right. So I should tread carefully. But Nixxes is most definitely a co-dev partner and is able to work together with other studios within the PlayStation Studios family. I think that's about the extent of things.
Well, you can also mention that we've previously delivered for Crystal Dynamics the extra DLCs. Yeah.
That's true. So before the acquisition of by Sony PlayStation, we did work on Marvel's Avengers, and we did contribute to main campaign content, and all 3 major DLCs were made at Nixxes.
All right, there's time for one final question. We're on time.
Yep.
There it comes.
Okay, this final question. Oh.
Well, thanks for the talk. It was great. I was personally kind of curious if you guys ever like run into bugs like it worked on like a PlayStation console, since you guys work with like devices that have like specific graphics APIs and like file system APIs and that kind of stuff. But basically, you like you discover that on PC something doesn't render or whatever, but like you have to go back to the PlayStation and find out what, like, basically, do you guys ever like find a weird oddity that worked on a PlayStation console but not?
Yeah, that often has to do with the fact that we can have a lot of frame rate on PC compared to the console. So we often have like high FPS bugs. So it can be like, oh, everything is working out fine, but then the character is falling through the roof because something didn't get loaded at the same time or something. So we often have to go back into the console and see, oh, what was it supposed to look like, or what was it supposed to work like, and then we need to figure out why that's not happening here. And it's never very straightforward, like, oh, it's just a toggle here or a toggle there. It's mostly like, oh, everything is not mismatching, and yeah, the file system needs to be more frame dependent or that kind of stuff. Yeah, so we do cross checks.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense that you, the frame rate is hard, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Alexandra Cunetchi. And if you